It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Joining us from New York City, Noor Ibrahim, Daily Beast Deputy World Editor. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Welcome as well to Catherine Field, Europe correspondent for New Zealand Media and Entertainment.
Hi, thanks for inviting me along.
How are things?
A busy week.
It's been a busy week. We'll find out why in a moment. Patrick Smith, Editor-in-Chief of the Africa Report. Busy for you as
Greetings, Francois. It was, yeah, lots of deadlines, lots of good stories too.
Okay, well, your next cover?
It's all about the climate talks and stranded assets in Africa and things like that.
All right. From Berlin, Georg Blume, you're used to seeing him in Brussels, Europe correspondent for News Weekly, Die Zeit. Great to see you.
Good to see you again.
The world
Hello from Berlin.
Hello from Berlin. Berlin, where it's all happening. We'll talk about that as well. The World This Week, where you can tell friends to subscribe to the podcast version on Apple, Spotify, and other streaming platforms. It's called Adding Insult to Injury.
The United States has no closer or more reliable ally.
You've got a point of view.
Dateline United Nations headquarters in New York. Joe Biden Tuesday sitting down with Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison at a time when Washington's oldest ally, France, had recalled ambassadors to both countries on unprecedented reaction to the blindside of a dropped submarine contract with Canberra and a surprise military alliance that brings in the UK and shuts out Paris. Now, French President Emmanuel Macron has since taken Joe Biden's call, and the French ambassador is returning to Washington next Monday. As for the Australians?
Yes, we have, and the opportunity for that call is not yet. But we'll be patient. We understand their disappointment, and that is the way you manage difficult issues. It's a difficult decision. It's a very difficult decision.
Okay, he's not taking the Prime Minister's call. We've now heard Catherine Field this Friday that the French Overseas Trade Minister didn't take a call from his Australian counterpart.
The French are going to leave the Australians hanging on the line for a very long time, I think.
What, Christmas 2023?
Well, they're in no rush. They are really furious about this. They feel that they had spent years, the French had been talking to the Australians, building up this so-called strategic alliance of multilateralism in the Indo-Pacific region. Not only that, France really are were the big power in the region. If anything happened, it was French troops or French military assets from French Polynesia, from New Caledonia, or from Abu Dhabi, which came into the mix in the Indo-Pacific.
What, more than the Americans? I mean, the Americans too are in the Pacific.
Yeah, but not in the same way that the French are. The French have got a demographic footprint. They've got territories in the South Pacific. They've been going into areas, particularly islands in the South Pacific, when there's been natural disasters. So they have, over the last, since the unfortunate incident of the Rainbow Warrior and the nuclear test, they've been really building up a lot of goodwill in the Indo-Pacific region. And to have this from an ally that France really did invest in this. Let's not forget, Emmanuel Macron went out there on a state visit. This was the pillar of the Élysées multilateral way of doing diplomacy in this new world. So to have this done behind their back was a real stab in the back, as the French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian said. They're not going to forget it in a while. And we're also seeing the remarks coming, of course, from the European Commission, European Union, trade talks between Australia and the EU. They are going to be really frosty. I did an interview earlier this week with someone from the EU side in those talks, and they say, wow, you think we played hardball with the Brits when it came to the Brexit talks? We're furious about this, and we will be really tough when it comes to these talks.
And siding with Paris is Australia's former Labour Prime Minister. Granted, Kevin Rudd's in the opposition. Nonetheless, he told France 24 he doesn't make sense of scrapping an existing deal for a hypothetical one.
Australia is not a civil nuclear power. We have all the technology. We could do it tomorrow if we liked. But there's never been a domestic consensus in Australia to build a civil nuclear industry. And if you're going to have nuclear-powered vessels, then one of the arguments which the current Australian government has never answered effectively is how are you going to service the nuclear-powered dimension of these submarines if you don't have your own local civil nuclear capacity? That means you're therefore going to consign the maintenance of these boats to the United States. And I don't think that is fundamental with the sovereignty which we should have over our own national defence forces.
So what, Australia didn't think it through?
Well, they didn't think a lot of things through. First of all, if they'd stuck with the French submarine deal, they would have had submarines by 2030.
So why did they do it?
It's what big boys do. It's what big boys do. He went with the Americans. Scott Morrison thought that this was a good deal. He was in with the Americans. It was great. And what they've ended up now with is they could have had submarines in 2030. Now they might get submarines in 2040.
I think it's, I mean, I think the sort of fallout between the Europeans, historical fallout is one thing, and, you know, it's hugely annoying for France. But the geopolitics of it, Australia's turned itself into a nuclear power overnight without actually abrogating the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. These submarines are powered by highly enriched uranium, you know, and China has legally the right to turn around, and it already has said, well, essentially you've broken the nuclear non-proliferation pact, and you have broken the agreement we had that you would not be targeted. So you're now a nuclear power, as far as we're concerned. So I think it has a deep geopolitical significance for the region beyond the rather childish games that the Brits and the Australians are playing with the French about this.
And also, though, when you think about what's happening in Iran, you know, you could have the same questions about the Iran nuclear diplomacy.
It's arrant hypocrisy.
Yeah.
I mean, you're trying to talk Iran out of a nuclear program, and then overnight you turn around and say, actually, we think you should have nuclear-powered subs. And, you know, we'd have to be really naive not to understand the subtext of having a nuclear-powered sub. It doesn't matter whether it's got bows and arrows on the sub. The fact is, it's powered by highly enriched uranium. And there's a message to China, if we want, we can turn this into a nuclear sub with nuclear weapons, so watch out. I mean, that is the message.
And Georg Blume, it was a surprise to see that this made it into Thursday night's candidates' debate in Germany, this issue of what's going on in the Indo-Pacific.
Yes, but don't expect a lot of pity for France here from Berlin, or for, you know, if a former Australian Prime Minister who has always loved talking a lot is the best ally the French have right now in the Indo-Pacific. They are not really an Indo-Pacific power, and I think it's a great chance for France to, you know, to abandon thinking of itself as a world military power and giving more thought to Europe. You know, that's maybe the only hope from us, from people here in Berlin right now, that these illusionary world projects and projection of military power in the Pacific from Europe, you know, are a little bit, you know, crazy anyway, and so, you know, we'll
hang on, Georg,
France is making a lot of.
Wasn't that the message of the French anyway during UN Week in New York, that we don't want it to always be a militarized approach to China?
Yes, and that's what's left now, to find another and a different approach, and how to harden commercial policies or human rights policies and so forth. It's probably, you know, the whole thing about Quad is a way for America to say, hey, we mean business with China, and we're serious with China, and we get our military things together so the Chinese won't, you know, just look over us, and but it's on the other side a great chance for Europe to really understand what their task is about.
Noor Ibrahim, just a couple weeks back, you and I were discussing on this very show how, with the withdrawal from Afghanistan, here was a chance for the United States perhaps to not always take a militarized approach to foreign policy. When you see what's unfolded the last 10 days, and Georg was just alluding to it now, that meeting taking place this Friday at the White House with the leaders of the U.S., India, Japan, and Australia. Once again, it's all about showing might in the face of the Chinese?
Yes, but it's
Noor
something they
Ibrahim?
can
Noor,
do.
let me
American,
put it to Noor.
it's something showing might.
Just a second,
having
Georg.
COVID.
Let me, because we have a bit of a delay with New York. So let me put it to Noor Ibrahim. Noor, your thoughts on where it's all going?
In terms of the
Are you
submarine
asking
issue,
me, or-
so I think that it's clear that it's bigger than the deal. It's bigger than the submarine thing. I think that it touches on ego and interpersonal relationships and just the embarrassment of it, the embarrassment of having some of your close allies go behind your back like this and being essentially the last to know about it. And let's not forget that there are some underlying issues there. The fact that I think France might still be trying to stomach the Trump years, for example. Biden could still be in damage control mode at this point. And when it comes to the UK as well, we have all these issues between France and the UK over plethora of different Brexit issues. So it does add salt to, some underlying issues there. And this kind of just made it all blow up. And again, it goes back to France being in the position of sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that we had the French foreign minister last Saturday accused Joe Biden of being Trump without the tweets, of acting like Trump without the tweets on this particular issue, that is being insensitive. There's been the phone call since between the French and the U.S. leaders. Did Joe Biden not see it coming, or did his administration not see coming that you'd have a strong reaction from Paris? Or they don't care?
I think they expected a reaction, but not one that has played out so publicly in a way that mirrors a schoolyard drama as it has over the past week. And again, it goes back to that of France being in. I think we're all in kind of PTSD mode and trying to figure out, is this is the position that I thought I was in. Am I as important to my friends as I initially thought I was? And I think that's the root of it.
Last week, we talked about the French foreign minister. He said he didn't even bother to recall Paris didn't even bother to recall the ambassador to London because, as Jean-Yves Le Drian put it, Britain is, quote, the fifth wheel of the coach. Rebuttal came from the UK Prime Minister Wednesday while doing the rounds in Washington.
I just think it's time for some of our dearest friends around the world to, prenez un grip about all this, and donnez-moi un break, because this is fundamentally a great step forward for global security. It's three very like-minded allies standing shoulder to shoulder, creating a new partnership for the sharing of technology.
Patrick Smith, your reaction to that?
Yeah, Europe is gripped, as Gerhard said, by this delusion of great power. Boris Johnson talks about global Britain, and France asks itself, in the words of L'Opinion this week, the French daily analysis paper, am I still a great power? I think the former colonial powers of Europe have to really start thinking very hard about what they should be doing. And Gerhard's right. I think they should be looking to doing stuff in Europe and sorting out Europe and not strutting around as though we're still in the late 18th century or maybe early 19th century. So Johnson is perhaps more guilty of this than Macron because he's older. And he's made a sort of cult out of being the nostalgic.
What do you make
British
of him
Prime Minister.
goading Emmanuel Macron there?
It's childish, and as Noor said, it's sort of schoolyard behavior.
Is it childish though? Is it childish, or is it changing the conversation? Because his sit down with Joe Biden didn't go as well as he would have liked.
That's it. Well, yeah, like Trump, he's very good when he's in a tight spot of changing the dynamic and changing the conversation, changing the subject, and that's part of it. Said, well, this is really about a little spat with France. It's nothing to do with UK-US relations. Of course, it's everything to do with UK-US relations.
And UK-US relations is Joe Biden telling him you're not going to have a trade deal anytime soon.
Yeah, that's
Exactly.
right. I mean, it's incredible. And apparently there's telephone calls call Friday morning here in Paris between French President Macron and Boris Johnson was frosty at best. And Macron said to him, you've got to come back with some sort of project, as the word the French have, some sort of project to get this alliance back on track. Well, I find it awfully difficult to see how they can get it back on track. You just, look, I made a list of what's been bugging them. You've got Brexit, you've got the Northern Ireland Protocol, you've still got the backlash from the COVID vaccinations, you've got migrants, you still haven't sorted out the fishing rights in the Channel Islands. I mean, this is not something that you can do with...
But they do have very close military ties, the two countries. They need to work
do,
together.
but when you have
Well, the Horn of Africa and the Sahel is a trade-off, and
Yeah.
France for a long time has been asking the Brits to do more in the Sahel. And as Gerhard said, or I think Gerhard said, the Germans are really looking to revise their position there. So I think I think there's plenty they could do. I don't think necessarily Johnson's got the vision to do that, but there's plenty he should do.
No, he's got the words to be able to sort of deflect, as you say, but there's not really any substance underneath.
Now, Johnson's Environment Secretary had spinning Joe Biden's flat rejection of a quick breakthrough on a trade deal with the UK. George Eustace telling Sky News that the President of the United States is, quote, probably at the moment just reading the headlines.
I think when you explain some of those provisions in detail, it is understood by the US government that clearly doesn't make any sense and therefore should be revisited.
I'm guessing he knows all of that.
Well, look, it's a very complicated piece of agreement, the Northern Ireland Protocol. I'm not sure he does fully appreciate all of that.
Not sure he appreciates all of that. Nor Ibrahim, does Joe Biden not understand Ireland and Northern Ireland?
It's pretty patronizing, isn't it? Especially, to Joe Biden, someone who flaunts his Irish heritage so frequently. And I think this was one of those rare glimpses of, politicians, just the honesty of it shining through and kind of trying to dispel that approach that Americans often have that are, the arrogant Americans. You guys don't know everything. You don't know us. But I think what's also interesting was Boris Johnson's follow-up to that. It sounded like, he was trying to say, no, we're all on the same page. There's no issues here. And they kind of just wanted to dismiss that moment because, it's not supposed to happen so openly between such close allies.
All right, and while the Western allies have been rowing amongst themselves, China's got problems of its own. We're going to talk about those when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. The Daily Beast deputy world editor Noor Ibrahim is with us from New York. Joining us in the studio, Catherine Field, Europe correspondent for New Zealand Media and Entertainment. Did you have to go to Cherbourg, where they were going to build those submarines?
No, we didn't get to go there this week, but we went to the headquarters of the naval group here in Paris.
We saw the trade unions come this way.
We were with the trade unions coming this way.
Patrick Smith, editor-in-chief of the Africa Report, is with us as well. And from Berlin, Georg Blume, a Europe correspondent for Newsweekly Die Zeit. In his speech before the United Nations General Assembly, China's president took the high road, making no mention of superpower rivalries. Instead, Xi Jinping promising to stop financing for coal-fired plants abroad. Welcome news ahead of that COP26 climate summit taking place next month in Scotland. An important first step ahead of that. Truth be said, Xi Jinping's got more pressing concerns than the South China Sea, like, for instance, the Sea of Red Ink, submerging troubled real estate giant Evergrande. Once a pinnacle of China's property boom, the company now owes $305 billion to creditors. On Thursday, it missed an $83 million interest payment to bondholders, and that's upping the uncertainty for everyone, from international banks to the construction workers at an unfinished building site in Suzhou, that's near Shanghai.
There are so many ongoing discussions.
Some workers are still here, not many though. We haven't been paid since April. I'm going to see the government in the next few days. Soon I won't have anything left to eat. People here don't have any food. We're all in the same situation.
Georg Blume, how serious is it?
Well, it shows that really these big Chinese companies are also can be too big to fail, can fail and can be perhaps too big to fail, because we are all hoping now that the Chinese government will bail Evergrande out, and we're all hoping that they'll find a solution. And it shows how dependent we are all on the Chinese financial system, and that we should be very careful in rhetorically asking always for the liberation of Chinese finance and the liberalized Chinese currency and so forth, because at the end, when China has real problems, we are all happy if the Chinese central government can intervene.
The Wall Street Journal reporting this Thursday that Chinese authorities have asked local governments to brace themselves for the potential downfall of Evergrande, Catherine Field. So it's a quandary for the president. Does he bail them out or not?
Well, he'll have to bail them out because he cannot have it on his watch that there was just this complete disaster, a sort of Lehman Brothers type disaster. I think it is going to collapse in some sort of way. It will be a managed collapse. It, in some ways, does suit what he is doing at the moment, which he is trying to reform, which has been a sort of a runaway financial sector in China, particularly the construction boom in China, has been enormous. It's just been sort of boom, boom, boom time. And particularly dangerous for Xi is the fact that a lot of small households have been buying these apartments. This is one of the few things you can do in China to secure your future. If you put all your eggs into the basket of an apartment that is safe. So he's going to have to, put his hand into his wallet to stop all those small investors from going out onto the streets. There are already some of them going and demonstrating outside the various headquarters of Evergrande, and he's going to have to do something about that. But it does give him the excuse to be able to really tighten down on some of these companies, financial companies in particular, that haven't really been playing by the rules, that the rules have sort of been there as guidance. And there's a lot of corruption. It's been really very much your connections as to whether or not
it's very murky because they haven't even said if they missed the payment.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is very opaque.
The paradox is, though, you mentioned the rules. Of course, it is the government's enforcement of those rules that have caused this crisis. They've tipped Evergrande into default, if you like. I mean, Xi has talked about this common prosperity policy, trying to get more people who actually live in houses as opposed to the property speculators into houses and with some security there. And by clamping down on the developers and the speculators, they've caused this crisis for Evergrande. And the other question is that there are another 10 Evergrandes in the queue behind this one, not quite as big, but pretty substantial, who are all on the brink of default. So I think this is pretty big. The last thing I would say as well, in terms of the internationalization of this crisis,
because the
Credit Suisse has been issuing debt on behalf of Evergrande. But Credit Suisse pulled out of Evergrande, of all its liabilities to Evergrande, 3 years ago. So I think there's another question about the complicity of Western financial institutions once more in a property speculation bubble.
And that brings us back, Noor Ibrahim, to Georg Blume's point at the beginning. Here we are all around the world rooting for a bailout.
Yes, and I mean, it really shows we're not in a cold war.
Let me put it to Noor Ibrahim.
Yeah, it's insane how one company can have, this kind of economic impact, not just in China, but around the world. And I know Catherine mentioned the Lehman Brothers crisis, and I'm no finance expert, but from what I've been hearing, there are distinct differences between, the two problems there, that namely the fact that Evergrande relies more on physical assets. So what I've been hearing is, it won't have that kind of impact. It won't play out the same way that it did in 2008. 8, but when you see the images of the protesters at the headquarters of Evergrande, and it kind of reminds you of those iconic images back in the day of the Lehman Brothers staffers walking out in boxes with all their office. It's hard not to be reminded of that, and that's definitely a reminder that no one really wants right now.
In many of the countries you visit, Patrick Smith, in Africa, how many of those buildings are built with Chinese know-how, with Chinese financing?
Exactly. I mean, you've got to look at the size of the Chinese property sector. Except what you're saying, Noor, about the physicality of Evergrande's assets in a way. But, the Chinese property sector is about 20%, a fifth of the entire Chinese economy. That's a massive hit. Of course, it's not all going to go bang, but it's symptomatic of what's been happening in the country. These massive investments near the seaboard of China, because of the migration from the north, people were due to come down to the south. They haven't been able to do that. So there's kind of this economic hiccup, and these property companies are in real trouble. So it's a kind of systemic crisis for the Chinese economy and also for outside investors who are now going to be asking questions. If they haven't been paid the coupon on the bond this week, how safe is the Chinese market for them? And those are big questions for the Chinese Communist Party in Beijing.
All right, big questions across the Rhine from here. Why Germany is not done with her yet, or certainly not her own Christian Democratic Union Party. Outgoing Chancellor Angela Merkel at a final rally in Munich Friday alongside her would-be successor. He's struggling, Armin Laschet, also with them the head of the Bavarian sister party, the CSU, Markus Söder. Is it fair to say, Georg Blume, that on the campaign trail, after 16 years, is where Angela Merkel didn't want to be?
Well, I don't know. We are somewhere where everybody who is, fond and excited about German politics is in a way in a situation where he's never been, really. Nobody really dares to say what's going to happen on Sunday, and will the Christian Democrats win as they always had? Will the Social Democrats do a fantastic comeback? Will the Greens come close to government? All can still happen. It's unbelievable. It's a real shake-up. It's going to be presented to us on Sunday.
It's the first time in post-war history, Catherine Field, where the outgoing chancellor is not on the ballot.
Yeah, it is. And everyone's raving all about Merkel. Mutti's going. What are we going to do? How dreadful is this? But, we're now starting to look at her legacy. And her legacy is actually sort of fairly dour. She's
dour?
Yeah, she's kept the ship safe. Germany's safe. Germany has been shaped. And
she was president of Europe during the Trump years, you could say.
Yeah, you could say. I'm sorry. I lived in Germany during reunification. I think Helmut Kohl did far more for Europe and the future of Europe and putting Europe together and creating the Germany that we have today than Angela Merkel ever did. But for me, I'm just going to give you one anecdote, which I think sums up Angela Merkel. Is she was once asked at a press conference, "Why do you always wear those suits? Why are you always dressed so dowdily?" And she replied, "I'm a civil servant. I'm not a model." And I think that shows how her regard for power is, that she's a servant of the people, and that's not something you see that often in politics these days.
So.
She was a hugely reassuring figure for the rest of Europe at a time of unprecedented global change when no one could make out what the hell was going on. We had, at a period when we had fascists storming the Capitol building in Washington, we had the rise of the far right in Hungary and Poland. We had a resurgent Russia under Putin. We had the Chinese commercial power dominating Europe. Merkel was some kind of reassuring figure. I think whatever for the rest of Europe. I'm not saying she was a great reformer. She wasn't. But for Germany, I think there are so many things that were left undone, like climate change. Fine, UN nuclear power, UN coal, but then what? What's the alternative? The fact that the German telecoms, internet companies are so far behind France, Britain, and the States is another weird thing. I mean, Europe's most prosperous economy. A lot of questions there.
Yeah, but couldn't you say that Angela Merkel could have been tougher on Orban, could have been tougher on the Poles, this whole
and
Merkel
Putin
thing.
too could have been tougher on
Oh,
all of them.
I have to stop you there somewhere.
Georg,
Come on, Berlin.
You are all, I mean, first of all, you seem to be all these fundamentally pro-nuclear people, and you forget about Merkel being the world leader to really draw a conclusion from Fukushima and to dare to say no to nuclear power, which is still for humanity a great victory, to have a world leader say no to nuclear threats, which remain a threat to humankind, as we know. The danger of nuclear power is always there. And you also seem to forget that Merkel was a political figure to open up Europe to 1 million refugees when they would have been tortured or killed on frontiers of Europe, when no other leader in the last 10 or 20 years has proved herself with such a humanitarian gesture as she did in that situation. And Georg,
let me ask you this.
She has not improved the digital landscape in Germany. Is a little bit
Georg,
if you want to draw
Blume,
a conclusion of her political life.
Let me ask you this, though. You know the old saying about Merkel was she can always be counted upon to do the right thing once she's exhausted every other option. That was particularly true during the financial crisis. She's been around long enough that that's starting to fade from memory. But could she have been bolder?
She could have been bolder on many things, but I told you two decisions where she was really bold and which were very important.
No, but hang on. Let's talk about nuclear there. Hang on. The decision to end nuclear power in Germany, that should have been taken, let's be honest, in the 1980s after Chernobyl, when parts of eastern Germany, particularly in Berlin, were closed down because there was the radiation that came from Chernobyl. The decision, or the idea to close nuclear power was actually Schröder, the SPD government, came up with this idea. And it was also interesting that Merkel only took this decision after Fukushima. She had been in power for a long time, could have done it much earlier. I'm sorry.
Yes, but that gave us for the first time a green government in southern Germany, and in the most important industrial region of Germany we have a green government now, and it's very interesting if it's not Merkel at the end which will have proposed a green policy in the future. When we see what's coming up now is that the new government will have the Green Party as one coalition partner, and all the question is now will become, Germany will not be the best digital country in the world, but Germany can be the best ecological country in the world, and that is the question for the next 10 years in Germany. And we will see in 10 years if Merkel has prepared that change or somehow prevented that change then to happen. That we don't know yet.
All right, let's talk about the putative frontrunner, because the polls can be wrong, especially when there's so many mail-in ballots this time. Social Democrat leader Olaf Scholz, he staged his final big rally in Germany's most populous state of North Rhine-Westphalia in Cologne. The current finance minister in a Merkel-led coalition government, that's going to be confusing to talk about here, he hopes to come across as the competent manager who can fill her shoes. Noor Ibrahim, your reaction to the fact that in this race, people want to come across as the safe pair of hands?
There is no safe pair of hands.
I think it makes sense, especially when you have these far-right fringe parties.
Go ahead, Noor.
Especially when you have these, no problem. I lost my train of thought now, but that's okay. Especially when you have these, in this new kind of election rhetoric that's been really, really blowing up lately, with a certain very far-right party, the AFD, the AFD, and the fact that We're seeing a lot of language that hasn't been as common in Germany, that kind of echoes a lot of what we saw during the last election in the U.S. With all this controversy about mail-in ballots and these far-right politicians just using almost verbatim the same language that Trump would use, and saying that there's going to be, massive election fraud, and advocating for really possibly harmful COVID management. And I think that that it just doesn't reflect Germany. It doesn't reflect the German people and who they are. So it makes sense that certain candidates would want to, seem like the safer option, so that, we don't delve into the same thing that we saw here in the U.S. quite recently, because we've seen
Nora, let me ask you,
how dangerous that can
Nora,
be.
let me ask you about that, because there were elections in Canada at the start of the week, and there was the anti-vaxxer, almost far-right party which didn't get into Parliament. Is it the sign, and perhaps we can, I don't want to project too much to what's going on in Germany, that after COVID, people don't want radicalism?
Absolutely, and I think that the same thing happened in Canada. People thought that they do a lot, that certain party would do a lot better than they actually did. So for some people, it completely fires them up and makes them just use even crazier language and be more aggressive with the fear mongering that they do. For a lot of others, that's a lesson of that's exactly what I don't want, and I think that's what we're seeing in both Germany and what we saw in Canada.
Finally, after Roger Milla scoring for Cameroon at the 1994 World Cup at the age of 42, make way for Ronnie Brunswick. He's the owner of Suriname's Inter Mogantapoe. He put himself into the lineup against Honduras, for the Honduras side Olympia, for their CONCACAF Cup first leg clash Tuesday at the ripe old age of 60. Brunswick playing 54 minutes. He's not just the owner, with the stadium named after himself. He's also a former rebel leader, a drug baron, and the country's vice president. He won't be playing the return leg, not because Inter lost 6-0, but because there's an Interpol notice for his arrest if he travels abroad. This story has captured imaginations the world over, Catherine Field.
I mean, you really don't know where to start in this story, do you? Do we talk about governance? Do we talk about fair play? I mean, I don't know. I think once again we're seeing how rich men have to own football clubs. This is the status object of the moment, whether it be in Suriname, whether it be in England, whether it be in Africa. This is what you do, and if that means that you go to excessive lengths to, in this case, try and get your team to win, then, go for it.
And certainly money is no object when you're the owner of a football club.
Not at all, not at all. And it just reminds me of all the shenanigans we've seen in FIFA over the years, and the constant investigations and the attempt to muzzle those investigations. At least you have a guy who's a pretty stand-up sort of guy. He's a drug dealer. He owns the football club. He's bought the stadium and all the rest of it. And he's got a Interpol arrest warrant out for him. I mean, why don't we have some honesty like that amongst the former FIFA?
Because apparently there's social media images of him in the visiting dressing room after the match, handing out cash. So we'll have to watch the scoreline for the return leg. Georg Blume, I know that it's always this call by football fans to have teams owned by the fans, something you do see in places in Germany.
Well, rarely, our bosses, our big football bosses have been former players of the national team. We all would like to see, Rubbeniges, Hoeneßes, and Oliver Kahns redescend in the area, in the arena, I would say, and then maybe, so we could laugh at them for this time, because we're all suffering from their might now as Bayern managers.
So you'd rather see them ridiculed on the field. That's good to know. Georg Blume with the final word on that. I want to thank you so much for joining us from Berlin ahead of those elections. I want to thank as well Noor Ibrahim in New York, Catherine Field, Patrick Smith. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.